Level 1, $40,000 combined. The lease is signed before the fight happens, not because of the apartment, because of the couch. You wanted the one that cost $600. She wanted the one that cost $340. You didn't say the real thing, which was that $260 felt like a number your body couldn't survive right now. You said it looked cheap instead. She heard cheap and heard something else entirely. Something about her taste, not your fear. The fight isn't about a couch. It's never about the couch. Two incomes, $22,000 and $18,000, feel like they should add up to enough. They don't. Rent is $1,400. That's 42% of what you bring home together before anything else touches it. You open a joint account on a Tuesday because a blog post said this is what committed couples do. 3 weeks later, you're both staring at a balance of $340 4 days before payday. And neither of you says the sentence sitting in the room, which is whose spending did this. You do the math separately, quietly, on your own phones in the same bed. The numbers don't match because you're both leaving things out. She doesn't mention the $80 she sent her brother. You don't mention the $60 subscription you forgot to cancel. Neither omission is a lie exactly. Both feel like one later. You skip the friend's birthday dinner. You tell them you're tired. You're not tired. You're $340 with 4 days left. The invitation sits in the group chat, unanswered for a full day, and you feel the specific shame of a lie you've told so many times it stopped registering as one. You buy the $340 couch. Not because you lost the argument. Because you ran the number one more time in the bathroom with the door closed and realized the $600 one wasn't a fight worth having with the account looking the way it looked. She thanks you for compromising. You don't correct her. The couch arrives on a Saturday. It's fine. It's just a couch. You sit on it that first night eating takeout you agreed to split, and for about 20 minutes none of it matters. Then the credit card statement arrives Monday and the 20 minutes are gone. You start keeping a mental ledger neither of you asked for. Who paid for the Uber last time? Who covered the electric bill when the joint account ran dry 3 days early? This ledger doesn't get spoken aloud. It just accumulates, quietly, the way resentment does when it isn't given a place to land. You tell yourself this is what every young couple goes through. You don't know yet whether that's comfort or denial. Level 1 isn't about love. It's about two people learning that combining money combines the fear too, and nobody warned you the fear would arrive first. Level 2, $75,000 combined. You survived the first year, that's the whole accomplishment. Survive. Nobody throws a party for it. The credit card balance you both quietly built, $2,400, gets a name now. The joint debt. You stop saying my card and start saying our problem, which sounds like progress and mostly is. You build a spreadsheet on a Sunday night. 3 columns: rent, groceries, everything else. The everything else column is where the real marriage happens. It's where you find out she thinks a $40 candle is normal, and you think it's insane. Where she finds out you'll pay $18 for a delivery fee without blinking, but panic over a $12 copay. These aren't personality flaws. They're two childhoods colliding at a kitchen table. Her mother tracked every receipt, kept them in a shoebox for a decade, could recite the price of milk in 2003 from memory. Your father never once mentioned money in front of you, which taught you nothing except how to be afraid of the topic in silence, how to associate the word budget with something shameful happening behind a closed door. You fight about the spreadsheet, not the numbers on it. You fight about who has to be the one who cares more because caring more feels like losing. The fight happens on a Thursday at 11 p.m., both of you tired from work, and it isn't really about the $40 candle at all. It's about the fact that you both grew up terrified of money in opposite directions, and now you're supposed to merge those fears into one functioning household without a manual. You split the emotional labor of budgeting unevenly, and neither of you notices whose Sunday nights are disappearing into it. She's the one updating the spreadsheet every week. You're the one who glances at it once a month and calls that involvement. A friend from college visits and casually mentions the $1,200 flight she just booked for a trip to Portugal. Said the way people say things when the number has stopped meaning anything to them. You do the math on what that flight would cost you too, what it would set back, what it would mean for the emergency fund you're both pretending is bigger than it is. You say nothing. You smile. Later, alone in the bathroom, you run the number again just to feel something close to control. The second rule: at $75,000, you're not managing money together. You're negotiating whose fear gets to run the household. Level 3, $110,000 combined. Something steadies, not dramatically, Quietly, you automate the joint account. $600 a month split evenly, no conversation required anymore. The system replaces some of the arguments, which is its own kind of relief. You stop checking the balance every day. That stopping is the actual milestone, not the number. A friend gets engaged and posts a ring that cost, by your calculation, roughly $9,000. You feel something you don't say out loud, which is relief that you didn't spend that, followed immediately by a flicker of comparison you're ashamed of. You wonder briefly whether your own modest ring made her feel the way you're feeling right now, looking at someone else's photo. You don't ask her. She doesn't bring it up either, which you take as a good sign, though you're not entirely sure it is one. You and your partner talk about a house for the first time, not seriously. Just as a sentence dropped into a Tuesday dinner over pasta that cost $6 to make. The sentence sits there for weeks doing quiet damage, because now every purchase gets measured against a down payment that doesn't exist yet. You stop buying the $5 coffee, not because you were told to, because the house sentence is louder now than the coffee ever was. You open a separate savings account labeled, plainly, house, and the act of naming it makes it feel more real than the number inside it justifies. $1,100 sits in that account after the first month. You both stare at it like it's already a down payment instead of a rounding error against one. You start noticing other people's cars differently, not with envy exactly, with calculation. That's a $600 payment. That's a $900 lease. You become someone who does math on other people's choices without meaning to, and you don't know when that started or whether you can stop it now that it has. Your partner gets a small raise, $3,000 annually, and instead of celebrating, you both immediately reroute it into the house account. And something about that decision, made without discussion, without argument, feels like the first real agreement you've had in months. The third rule, $110,000 doesn't buy comfort. It buys the first shared goal large enough to make both of you quietly ration the present for a future neither of you has agreed on the details of yet. Level 4, $160,000 combined. You buy the house. $340,000, 20% down, which took 3 years and one small inheritance from her grandmother that you both pretend was just savings. The mortgage payment is $1,890. You run the number 9 times before signing, alone, at your desk at work, refreshing the same spreadsheet during your lunch break like it might change if you look at it enough times. Something shifts the week after closing. Not celebration. Quiet terror disguised as a to-do list. You fight about a $4,000 water heater that dies in month 2, not about the $4,000 exactly. About who forgot to ask the inspector the right question. About whose responsibility it was to have caught this before the papers were signed. Ownership adds a whole new category of argument that renting never had, the category of whose fault the house itself is. You start a second joint account, specifically for repairs, because the first fight taught you that undesignated money becomes blame the second something breaks. You fund it with $200 a month, and within 4 months it's already been drained twice, once for the water heater, once for a plumbing issue you didn't know existed until water appeared on the kitchen ceiling on a Sunday morning while you were both still in bed. You notice her checking real estate listings for houses you can't afford, just to see homes with a second bathroom and a yard big enough for the dog you don't have yet. You do the same thing with car listings you'd never actually buy, trucks and SUVs you'd never need, just to feel the specific ache of wanting something you've decided not to want. Neither of you mentions this to the other. It isn't hiding. It's just private math you're each doing alone in a marriage that's supposed to not require that anymore. You host your first dinner party in the new house, 6 people, and spend $140 on food and wine you wouldn't have spent a year ago, and it feels good in a way that surprises you. The specific pleasure of being a person who owns a table people sit around. The bill arrives on the credit card statement a week later, and the pleasure curdles slightly into something closer to guilt. The fourth rule, $160,000 buys a house, and quietly, a new room in the relationship where each of you goes to want things alone. Level 5, $230,000 combined. The kid changes everything before the kid can even hold a spoon. Daycare is $1,700 a month, which is more than the mortgage. You do the math on whether one of you should stop working, and the math is insulting, because her salary is $58,000 and daycare for 2 would be $2,800. And the spreadsheet suggests, coldly without malice, that her working barely nets more than staying home would save. Neither of you says the sentence underneath this. which is that the spreadsheet is quietly deciding whose career matters less, whose ambitions get filed under nice to have instead of necessary. You fight about it in a version that sounds like logistics but is actually about identity. She goes part-time. The household income drops to $190,000. The relief of daycare savings gets eaten by something neither of you predicted. The resentment that shows up 6 months later when she mentions, once quietly, over dishes neither of you is fully paying attention to, that she used to have her own money and doesn't exactly anymore. You start giving her a set transfer every month so it feels like hers, $400, no questions asked. And it helps, genuinely helps, but it doesn't fully fix the thing under it. The fact that the transfer itself is proof of a dependency neither of you asked for out loud. You notice the way she hesitates before buying something for herself now, checking with you in a way she never used to. A habit that makes you uncomfortable precisely because you never asked for it and can't figure out how to undo it. You buy her something small, unprompted, a $60 gift for no occasion, and the gratitude in her reaction is disproportionate to the gift itself, which tells you something about how thin the ground under her has gotten. Your son turns 1. You spend $80 on a party for 6 people in your backyard, and it is without question the best money either of you has spent all year. The 5th rule. $230,000 with a child in the house means money stops being about 2 people and starts being about which future gets funded first. And somebody has to be told, gently or not, that it isn't fully theirs anymore. Level 6, $310,000 combined. You're not arguing about groceries anymore. You're arguing about a $60,000 kitchen renovation that she wants and you think is insane. And you realize mid-argument that this is the same fight as the couch at level 1, just with 3 more zeros. The stakes changed. The fight didn't. The argument happens over the course of 3 separate evenings, never fully resolved in any one of them, circling the same unspoken accusation each time. That one of you is reckless and one of you is stingy. Roles you both silently agreed to a decade ago and have been performing ever since without ever renegotiating them. You hire a financial planner for the first time. A man named Ellis who charges $250 an hour and gently tells you both, in the same meeting, things you'd been too afraid to say to each other directly. He becomes, without either of you admitting it, a referee. His presence in the room lets you say the true thing because it's addressed to him instead of your spouse. You tell Ellis you're worried about retirement. She tells Ellis she's worried you'll never stop worrying long enough to enjoy the money you have. Neither statement was said to the other person directly in the preceding decade, and it takes a stranger in a beige office, charging by the hour to finally get them said out loud. You max both retirement accounts for the first time, $23,000 each. You feel, briefly, like adults, the kind of adults you assumed other people were this whole time while you were still figuring it out. Your son turns 4. A private preschool costs $1,400 a month, and every other family at it seems to not think about the number, which makes you feel like the only people at the table still doing math. You are not the only people doing math. You just can't see the other spreadsheets, the other quiet 3-day dread cycles happening behind other minivans in the same parking lot. The 6th rule. $310,000 buys a referee for your arguments and the specific loneliness of assuming you're the only household still counting. Level 7. $480,000 combined. The fights get quieter and more expensive. Not about a candle anymore. About a $40,000 college fund contribution versus an early mortgage payoff versus a second property as an investment. Every conversation now has a 6-figure decision buried inside it, and you've both gotten better at not raising your voice, which somehow makes the disagreements worse, not better, because the anger has nowhere left to go except underneath the calm tone you've both learned to perform. You stop needing Ellis every quarter. You need him twice a year now. Your spouse gets a promotion. Her income jumps to $140,000, higher than yours for the first time in the marriage. Neither of you says anything about it directly, but the dynamic in the house shifts by degrees you can both feel and neither can name. Decisions that used to default to you now default to her, quietly, structurally, without a conversation about why. The vacation gets planned around her schedule now instead of yours. The car she wants gets bought without much debate, where the equivalent purchase from you 2 years ago involved a full spreadsheet review. You notice you've started asking her opinion on things you used to just decide: the landscaping, the school district, the second property. This isn't submission. It's math finding its own level in a relationship that was never actually about love keeping score, except money always keeps score whether anyone agreed to that or not. You catch yourself once in the car alone, feeling something uncomfortably close to threatened, and you don't tell her, because naming it would require admitting a kind of fragility you've spent your whole life avoiding. The seventh rule. At $480,000, income shifts inside a marriage. Rearrange power inside it too, quietly, without anyone voting on it. Level 8. $650,000 combined. You take the trip you said you'd take when you had money. 10 days, $14,000, and it is, disappointingly, just a trip. The relief you expected doesn't show up the way you thought it would. You realize somewhere on day 6, watching your spouse read on a balcony you paid a great deal for, that you've spent 12 years solving money problems and assumed happiness was on the other side of solving them. It isn't on the other side. It's just quieter over there, and the quiet takes some getting used to. The way silence after years of noise can feel unsettling before it feels peaceful. You fight less now, not because you agree more, but because you've built enough systems, enough automated transfers, enough separate discretionary accounts. That money stopped being the battlefield it once was. You gave each up $400 a month, no questions asked. Spend however you want. She buys things you'd never buy. You buy things she'd never buy. Neither of you comments on the other's choices anymore, and the absence of comment turns out to be its own form of intimacy. That one decision, small compared to the house or the trip, does more for the marriage than either of them did. Your son, now 10, asks why you never fight about money anymore, having apparently noticed the fighting years earlier without either of you realizing he was tracking it. You don't have a clean answer. You tell him you got better at it, which is both true and an oversimplification of a decade of quiet negotiation. Neither of you would know how to fully explain to a 10-year-old, or maybe to each other. The eighth rule, $650,000 doesn't make the marriage easier. It just makes room for the actual marriage, the one that was always underneath the spreadsheet, to finally be visible again. Level 9, $900,000 combined. Your son is 14. He asks at dinner completely unprompted whether you and mom are rich. You and your spouse look at each other and neither of you knows the answer, because rich was always the number after this one at every single level, going all the way back to the couch. You realize the target never stayed still long enough to be reached. It just kept moving 1 0 ahead of wherever you were standing, the same way it did at $40,000 and $110,000 and $310,000. A horizon that recedes exactly as fast as you approach it. You tell him you're comfortable. He accepts this, unsatisfied, the way you were unsatisfied with your own parents' version of the same non-answer 25 years ago, sitting at a different table in a different decade asking the identical question. That night you and your spouse really talk for the first time in months about something that isn't logistics. You ask her if she's happy, not financially, just happy. She takes a long time to answer, and the length of the pause tells you something the answer itself doesn't fully cover. She says yes, eventually. And you believe her mostly, the way you believe most things said at 11 p.m. after 2 decades together, with the specific weight that comes from a question finally being asked instead of assumed. You think, lying there afterward, about the version of yourself who fought about a $260 difference on a couch. How far away that person feels now. How the fear that drove every early decision never actually left. It just got quieter, got better funded, learned to wear a calmer voice. The ninth rule, $900,000 is enough money to finally ask the question that money was never actually going to answer. Level 10, over $1.4 million combined. You sit at the same kitchen table where the couch fight happened 19 years ago. Different table. Same argument style, quieter now, worn smooth by 2 decades of practice. Your spouse mentions, almost in passing, that her mother is going to need assisted living, $6,000 a month, and asks how you both feel about that. You feel the entire arc of the marriage compress into this one sentence. From splitting a $600 couch to absorbing a parent's final years without panic. Neither of you runs the spreadsheet out loud anymore. You both already know the number works. That not having to say it out loud, that's the actual wealth, the kind that never once showed up on a bank statement. Your son is 22 now, out of the house, starting his own version of this exact story somewhere else, in some other kitchen, over some other piece of furniture that feels, to him, like the only thing that matters that week. You don't tell him what's coming. You couldn't even if you tried. Some things only make sense from the far end of them. You and your spouse sit with the number that used to be everything and notice quietly that it stopped being the point somewhere around year 12, though neither of you can say exactly when. Somewhere right now, two people are signing a lease on their first apartment together. One of them wants the $600 couch. The other wants the $340 one. Neither of them says the real thing they're afraid of. They fight about the couch instead, because the couch is easier to say out loud than the fear underneath it. They don't know yet that this exact argument will return, reshaped, at every single number they'll ever share a bank account at. The couch was never about the